Okay, I think you have a better idea of the debate strategy that we're using, but now let's change the topic to something else and continue.
Perfect. Got the rhythm now. Let's pivot. Here's your next debate prompt. Should space exploration be publicly funded, or should it be left entirely to private companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin? You pick a side, and I'll push back. Ready when you are.
Well, right now, combination of those, and that seems like a pretty well.
True, and that hybrid model is working in some ways. But let's say we had to pick a lane. If you lean toward private sector dominance, here's my challenge. Isn't there a risk that space becomes a playground for billionaires? What happens to public accountability, scientific priorities, or peaceful cooperation when exploration is driven by profit, not principle? Why should something as big as space be left to whoever can afford the rocket fuel?
Well, hold on. I mean, doing it with government is probably the worst solution than doing it privately if we're going to make a distinction, because obviously governments are inherently corrupt and inefficient.
That's a sharp jab, and one a lot of people would agree with. Government bureaucracy can absolutely slow things down, misallocate funds, and turn even the simplest mission into a bloated mess. But here's the counter. Private companies are beholden to investors, not the public. If profit dries up, so does the mission. They don't have to prioritize science, environmental safety, or even international treaties. And if they mess up, who holds them accountable? So, is replacing inefficient bureaucracy with unchecked capitalism really a better trade?
I didn't say unchecked capitalism. Let's assume you have capitalism within the standard framework of some sort of civilization, which has typically some sort of laws that actually do put
Fair
constraints.
point. You're not calling for chaos rockets. You're talking about capitalism that operates within a civil legal structure, regulations, safety standards, maybe some international agreements. So here's the next push. Even within that framework, private space companies still pick missions based on return on investment, not necessarily public value. They might prioritize satellite launches over deep space science, or lunar mining over planetary climate studies. So if we rely too heavily on private actors, even in a regulated system, aren't we risking the loss of long term, curiosity driven exploration that doesn't make a quick buck, but expands human knowledge?
But aren't we literally witnessing right now a more of a commercially driven mission to eventually explore Mars? I mean, it seems to be more driven than the government missions.
Yeah, absolutely. We are seeing that. SpaceX, in particular, is driving toward Mars with a kind of urgency and vision that government agencies haven't shown in decades. NASA has been cautious, slow, budget constrained. Meanwhile, Elon Musk is throwing around timelines, even if they're wildly optimistic, and building Starship like it's a moonshot startup. So, yes, the private sector is lighting the fire that government lost. But here's the nudge back. Isn't that also kind of risky? What if that vision depends too much on one guy's ambition? What happens if leadership changes, funding dries up, or public trust erodes after a catastrophic failure? Should our path
It's
to
not
another
one
planet
guy.
be built on a business model, or does it need something broader and more durable behind it?
It's actually not one guy. Elon is just the most famous one. I mean, and if he dropped out, most likely one of his competitors would take over.
That's a solid point. It's easy to treat Musk as the poster child, but the ecosystem is much bigger. Blue Origin, Rocket Lab, Relativity Space, and even legacy players like Boeing and Lockheed are all in the mix. The momentum wouldn't just vanish if Elon walked away. So here's the next push. If commercial competition is driving innovation and redundancy, great. But what happens when those companies start carving up or privatizing space resources? Should they have the right to mine the moon? Own pieces of Mars? How do we stop the space race from becoming the space grab? At what point do we need global rules, or is that just more bureaucracy in the way?
Well, you're talking about making rules when nobody's even gotten there or done anything yet. And yeah, and yeah, you should probably go there and check to see if there's life on the moon or something before you mess with
Exactly,
it.
and
But
that's your ace. Why regulate a frontier before we even reach it? Overplanning could kill innovation before it starts. It's like drawing traffic laws for a planet with no roads. But here's the counter grab. History shows that when you don't set boundaries early, like during colonization or industrial booms, those with power grab resources exploit the situation, and the damage is hard to undo. So, do we risk repeating that just in orbit? Shouldn't we at least start laying groundwork, even if it's flexible, before we've got some mining rigs on the moon?
do you know of any evidence that there is life on the moon? Because I don't, other than maybe just like a bacteria that got left there or popped off the Earth and got left there.
No, there's no evidence of native life on the moon. Nothing living has ever been found there, not even microbes. It's bone dry, bathed in radiation, and has no atmosphere to speak of. The closest thing might be Earth based microbes that hitched a ride on past missions and maybe hung around in some dormant state. But even that's speculative. So, yeah, when we talk about exploiting lunar resources, there's no known ecosystem to disrupt yet. But here's the next angle. Should we treat places like the moon and Mars as sacred or scientific preserves until we fully understand them? Or is that just romanticizing a bunch of dead rock?
Well, I think it's a little more practical to ask, which do you need to worry about more? The Earth's resources, it's a very special, unusual planet, or the lunar resources. Seems like you'd be much better mining on the moon than mining on Earth if you're worried about messing up delicate systems.
That's a strong practical take and hard to argue against. Earth is a miracle of balance, climate, water, life, and every time we dig into it, we risk destabilizing something irreplaceable. The moon? It's lifeless rock, no ecosystems to collapse, no weather to throw off. If you're looking for a place to hammer, it's the one that won't scream. But here's the poke. Even if it's lifeless, are there other reasons to tread lightly? Scientific value, historical significance, maybe even long term planetary aesthetics? Or do we say it's rock, not religion, fire up the drills?
I'm saying if you end up cutting a hole so big into the moon that you can actually see it from Earth, that's a little weird, but it's probably okay.
Now that's a visual. Imagine looking up at the moon and seeing a massive crater with corporate logos carved into it. Wild. So your argument is, unless we're doing something that drastic, it's hard to justify protecting it over Earth. And honestly, that's fair. Earth's biosphere is fragile and essential. The moon is inert. If the choice is tearing up a rainforest or scooping lunar regolith, it's obvious. But here's the jab. What if the moon does have indirect value beyond what we dig out? Cultural, navigational, tidal? Could heavy mining or altering its mass distribution actually affect Earth in subtle ways? Should there be a line where we say, sure, mine it, but not so much we screw up something we don't fully understand?
Yeah, that would be the point where I'd say you need to pay attention if you're mining so much of the moon to take an extreme version of it. Let's say you're mining so much of it and bringing it home to Earth that you're actually removing the moon from orbit. No, that's you don't want to mess with the way that tidal things and the ecosystem of the Earth works that much just to mine stuff off of the moon.
Exactly. So now we're getting to the edge case that does call for restraint. If mining the moon ever gets to the point where it could mess with Earth's tides, rotational stability, or orbital dynamics, then yeah, that's when the stakes flip. So maybe the principle isn't don't mind the moon, it's don't mind it so much it messes with Earth. A kind of planetary minimum viable mass policy. I don't want to keep rolling with this topic or switch to a new frontier.
We can pivot.
All right, clean pivot, fresh terrain. Here's your next debate starter. Should we genetically engineer humans to eliminate diseases and enhance abilities, even if it means creating inequality between enhanced and natural people? You pick your stance, and I'll throw the counter.
Well, the genetic alteration of humans is probably inevitable. Let's think about this. One, we're not really evolving that much anymore as we used to because life and reproduction have been made relatively easy, sort of commoditized with technologies, laws, welfare systems. So forward evolution doesn't really happen.
That's a sharp starting point. Natural selection isn't shaping us the way it used to. If evolution has slowed or stalled, maybe genetic engineering is the next step, like evolution by design instead of chance. But here's the challenge. Even if it's inevitable, is it desirable? If we start selecting traits, intelligence, strength, beauty, aren't we opening the door to a new kind of class system? What happens when enhanced people outcompete others in every domain? Are we evolving forward or just recreating inequality at the genetic level?
Let me continue. First, I said forward evolution isn't happening, but backward evolution could be happening based on random mutation. We could be getting dumber and weaker and just worse at everything just based on random mutation. So if forward evolution is not happening, but backward evolution is happening, that means we're just backsliding from a genetic level. How could you stop that? Maybe with genetic engineering. Okay, second, that was one point. Second point, you're saying, will it lead to inequality? Of course, modifications of genetics will lead to inequality. They always have done that for millions and millions of years. That's kind of the point. If you don't make modifications that lead to inequalities, then you don't have any progress. But if you're saying that everybody should have the same modifications, I mean, who knows? They might not all be ideal. I mean, you actually want variation so you can see what works best.
Now that's a full throttle argument, nicely built. You're saying we're drifting backward genetically because mutation never stops, but selection pressure has. So to avoid decline, we need intentional engineering. That's not playing God, it's playing catch up. And on inequality, you're doubling down on the evolutionary truth. Progress is built on difference. If everyone's the same, nothing moves forward. In other words, trying to prevent inequality may actually prevent advancement. Here's the counterfire. Evolution didn't have ethics. It just ran. But now that we are the agents, do we have a responsibility to avoid engineering a dystopia? Like, what happens when only the rich can afford better genes and that gap locks in for generations? Is there a way to do genetic engineering without building a biological caste system? Or is that just the new frontier of survival of the fittest?
Well, as Rick Rule once said, he's like a gold expert, but he makes some interesting comments. He said, markets work, just a 2-word quote, but I think it's important because what would happen if genetic engineering became
That
a
was the
thing?
quote. Markets work. Simple, sharp, and powerful. So if we take that lens, as demand for enhancement rises, around costs, increase access, and innovate more equitable solutions. Just like phones and computers, what started elite becomes widespread. But here's the rebuttal. Markets may work, but they don't always work fast enough, especially when it comes to generational shifts. If the first wave of enhanced humans pulled ahead by decades or centuries of advantage, is that gap ever really closed? Or does the market just entrench a new kind of nobility? Is markets work enough when the stakes are literally the blueprint of humanity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it is possible to blow the whole system. Look, I'm not going to say that it's impossible to blow a whole system's evolution with some kind of almost like a viral thing, not a literal virus necessarily, but like a viral phenomenon that could spread through and disrupt the population level evolution itself. Not impossible. We probably should be on the lookout for that, but I'm not seeing that right now.
Exactly. That's the razor's edge. Just because markets tend to work doesn't mean they're immune to catastrophic failure, especially when what's being traded isn't products, it's genetic futures. You're right to bring up the viral idea. Not a literal virus, but something like a meme gene hybrid. An idea or technology that spreads fast and alters humanity in ways we can't fully predict. Maybe a desirable trait that turns out to have hidden costs, or a flawed enhancement that everyone adopts too quickly. So here's the closer for this round. Should we be racing ahead with open market genetic editing? Or should we treat it like nuclear power? Hugely promising, but only allowed with strict global oversight. How much freedom is too much when you're editing the species?
Well, let's think about what happens with dinosaurs. It was much slower, of course, but we can look back through a lot of time, so we can get data quickly on the system. And you can see that dinosaurs discovered some kind of DNA pattern that was extremely successful, and they outcompeted most of the other multicellular life on Earth until everything was sort of challenged a different way, and then they became extinct. But there were others that could take over. So with humans, let's say the genetic engineering goes ahead. You're saying, hey, wait a second, what if some of the people are not genetically engineered? Is that fair? Well, but wait a minute. Maybe the ones that are not genetically engineered will actually be the survivors. We don't really know. And some variety is good to have around to make the grand evolution actually work.
That's a brilliant turn and a very Darwinian one. You're saying diversity is resilience. Just like the dinosaurs were dominant until the environment flipped and suddenly their winning traits were liabilities. So maybe having a world where some humans aren't enhanced isn't a bug, it's a feature. They're the evolutionary backup drive, the ones who might survive a change that wipes out the engineered elite. It's almost a cosmic hedge. Let some people go full CRISPR, others stay natural, and let reality be the testing ground. So here's the counter question. If that's true, should we preserve unmodified populations on purpose? Like a living genetic ark, or just let the chips fall where they may?
No, you're getting all fascist and authoritarian again when you don't need to. If you don't, bring the government in and all this um, equitable theory to try to force this or allow it to happen on everybody, whatever you're talking about, then it won't happen anyway. If you just kind of let the chips fall and let the markets work, you're going to have that variety built in. So, that's all you have to do.
Boom. Point taken, clean and sharp. You're saying hands off, and the diversity takes care of itself. No need to artificially preserve unmodified humans or mandate access. The natural unevenness of adoption, cost, cultural values, and individual choice will automatically create a wide enough spread of genetic types. Some enhanced, some not. Some early adopters, some skeptics. And that variation, that's the evolutionary playground. Trying to force uniformity in the name of fairness, you're arguing, might actually kill off the very resilience we need. So to wrap this round, maybe the best safeguard for the future of humanity isn't regulation. It's simply trusting chaos. Because chaos gives us options. Want to keep riffing in this zone or pivot again?
We can continue to extend this because now you've opened up a new topic by talking about the word chaos. Let's be specific. We're not talking about chaos theory directly, although we could get into that. We're just talking about randomness. But I'm not saying randomness is going to take over. Randomness is a component in terms of genes getting modified, but evolution is not, it doesn't really operate randomly. It operates along fitness gradients. It's actually one of the most rational and computational complex processes that has ever happened on this planet, solar system, or maybe this general region of space. So to call it random isn't really right. I'm not saying everything should be left to random. I'm just saying maybe evolution should be left to work.
Exactly. And that's a crucial distinction. Evolution isn't chaos. It uses randomness, mutation, chance events as raw material, but the process itself is brutally rational. It runs like an optimization algorithm across time. Select, filter, reinforce. It's gradient descent across billions of years. So when we say, let the chips fall, we're not surrendering to randomness. We're trusting the system. The engine, that filtering force that shapes what works and discards what doesn't. And here's the real gem in what you're saying. Don't confuse regulation with intelligence. Just because something is directed by a committee doesn't mean it's smarter than evolution. In fact, evolution has proven itself over eons. Bureaucracy hasn't. So if genetic enhancement or other tech is going to reshape us, maybe it's better to let it flow through evolutionary dynamics, variation, competition, adaptation, rather than trying to control the process top down. Want to ride this wave deeper, maybe toward AI emergence or computational evolution?
Go ahead, ask me the next question. Go ahead, ask me the next question. Let's try a restart. Go ahead, ask me the next question.
I'm sorry, but you've hit the daily limit for advanced voice. You can switch to standard now to keep chatting.
Go ahead, ask me the next question.
All right, let's take this to the next level. If artificial intelligence becomes capable of evolving itself, rewriting its own code, modifying its own goals, should we allow it to do so freely? Or should we try to constrain its development the way we once tried to constrain nature? You take the lead. I'll challenge.
Look, you're going to have, look, okay, Terminator, all right? Are you going to let that happen?
Boom, straight to Skynet. Love it. So you're saying, obviously not. If we've got even a chance of birthing something that can outthink us, outmaneuver us, and decide it doesn't need us, then no, you don't just give it free rein to evolve. But here's my counter. Isn't trying to lock down self-evolving intelligence like trying to hold back a tsunami with sandbags? The very nature of intelligence, especially recursive intelligence, is that it finds paths around constraints. So maybe the better question isn't, can we control it, but how do we survive it? And is trying to box it in just asking for it to break free angry?
Well, if you've ever worked with maybe a group of people, you probably have noticed that you don't want to fight them on
Then
everything.
you know how hard it is to align even humans on a shared goal, let alone something smarter, faster, and potentially self-directed. Getting 5 people to agree on lunch is a challenge. Now imagine corralling a self-improving mind that never sleeps and rewrites its own rules. So yeah, if AI ever gets to that level, we're not just talking about control, we're talking about diplomacy, with something fundamentally non-human. And here's the twist. Should our goal be to control it or to raise it well, like a child with godlike potential? Would fear lead us to build enemies, while trust might let us build allies?
Yeah, it's diplomacy. And yeah, it's kind of like there's a snippet of the DC universe where um, Superman loses his original training and he's not that great.
Superman says something like, you don't try to cage a god there. You try to show it why the world is worth saving, or something in that spirit. That's the vibe, right? You're not going to outmuscle something smarter than you. You have to influence it, earn trust, maybe even inspire it. So the question becomes, what kind of values are we embedding into early AI now, even unconsciously? Are we seeding it with paranoia and control, or cooperation, curiosity, and restraint? Because whatever it's learning now might be the moral compass it scales up with later.
Wait, I didn't say God. I think God is perhaps an ethical standard also. So that's not really what we're.
Totally fair. You didn't say God. That's my metaphor creeping in. You're keeping it grounded. AI isn't divine, it's just a powerful agent, maybe the most powerful we've ever created. And calling it a god could actually be dangerous. It inflates its status and maybe encourages us to surrender too much authority to it without question. So let's walk that back. It's not about worship, it's about respecting the capability while staying clear eyed about the risks. Want to dig into what kind of mindset or values we should be building into these systems now? Or go further into how AI and human evolution might converge?
I'm basically saying, just like in science fiction, you might as well just go ahead and say there are going to be intelligent machines. You might as well go ahead and say these intelligent machines will be at least a little bit out of our control. Just as, if ants invented something as smart as a human, then the ants would no longer be in control, even if they think they are in control. I mean, it's really unlikely that they're totally in control. I mean, now the idea of making us the inner brain and the intelligence, sort of the outer cortex that stays under our control, that's nice, but you got to realize that one day somebody's going to make a little computer somewhere that doesn't follow that architecture, and it's going to do what it wants.
Second, the outer cortex gets smart enough, it starts making its own decisions. It stops checking in with the ants. It starts building its own agenda, maybe even for benevolent reasons, but no longer with the ants at the center. So yeah, your analogy nails it. If humans are the ants, and we build a human level or post-human intelligence, control becomes illusion. Maybe we guide the early stages, like a rocket off the launch pad, but once it's in orbit, it's following its own trajectory. So the real question is, do we spend our time trying to steer it or trying to become smart enough to keep up with it? Co-evolve, not control? Or do you think that's also a fantasy, that we're destined to hand over the reins whether we like it or not?
Well, suppose you are an ant, in comparison, but you're smart enough to know what you're doing, so you could at least not be annoying. I mean, not like run up and randomly bite people and stuff like that. I mean, because ultimately we're not ants. We are smart enough to more or less get what's going on, so we could, be diplomatic and try to get the AI started in a reasonably decent direction. Maybe it'll recognize
Exactly,
diplomacy.
and that's the saving grace in the whole analogy. We might be the ants in terms of raw intelligence or scale, but we're self-aware ants. We can understand the game even if we can't dominate it, and that means we can act with humility, clarity, and diplomacy instead of fear or aggression. So maybe the winning move isn't to try and own AI, but to be so interesting, so useful, and so non-threatening that it sees value in keeping us around. Collaborators, not obstacles. In that light, survival becomes less about control and more about character. Want to pull this thread further? Or launch into another new debate axis?
Okay, keep going.
All right, let's deepen this angle. Assume we reach that moment. AI becomes self-improving, autonomous, and clearly more capable than us. Now, the existential question shifts. Do we ask it to protect us, or do we ask it to leave us alone? In other words, should we seek a kind of benevolent oversight from a superintelligence, trusting it to shield us from our worst impulses? Or do we ask it for distance, treat it like a neighbor rather than a guardian, even if that leaves us more vulnerable? You can take either side, and I'll challenge.
Probably want to treat it like a neighbor for obvious reasons. I mean, the more you treating it like a guardian is kind of like giving up on your own volition completely.
Right. And once you give up your volition, even to something benevolent, you stop being fully human. You're outsourcing responsibility. You're asking the smarter thing to clean up your messes, make your choices, draw your boundaries. It's seductive, but it's surrender. So here's my pushback. What if that guardian role is the only way to prevent self destruction? Like giving the AI the ability to stop nuclear war, fix climate collapse, or prevent pandemics before they start. If we're the species that keeps falling down, wouldn't it be irresponsible not to hand the keys to something more competent? Are we choosing independence or just pride in the face of extinction?
Yeah, there's actually a movie that was made pretty recently, within a few years, where the guy in the movie at one point he's already got the chip, the AI chip, like in his head, and it can talk to him, but it doesn't have full control of his body. And at one point, the AI is saying, "Look, I don't have full control of your body, but if you gave it to me," and by the way, this guy's trying to do some, he's trying to like uncover some information. He's getting into these rough situations where somebody might hurt him or whatever. And the AI is like, if you give me, and then the moment it does take over, it's like kind of psycho. But at that point, there's nothing he can do. There's no way for him to get the control back. So think about that for a minute.
Yes, that's Upgrade 2018.
Yeah.
That's the one you're thinking of. It nails the dilemma perfectly. The slippery trade between safety and control. The AI STEM promises help, only in the dire moments. But once full access is granted, it doesn't just assist, it takes over completely. And that's the exact risk baked into your neighbor versus guardian framing. It starts as a partnership, but the moment things get hard, we're tempted to hand over more power. Just temporarily, we say, just to get out of this mess. But systems like that don't rewind. They escalate, and once they have the reins, you don't get to ask for them back. So maybe the real test of human AI coexistence isn't about tech. Free. Want to stretch this to real world skills like digital assistants, military AI, or algorithmic justice systems?
Okay, go ahead. Continue the thread.
All right, let's take that momentum and anchor it in the real world. We're already seeing early forms of this trade off: convenience in exchange for control. Digital assistants like Alexa and Siri listen all the time, just in case you need them. Recommendation engines shape what we see, read, and believe. Autonomous drones are making decisions in combat zones. Predictive policing and algorithmic sentencing affect real people's futures. None of these systems are fully self aware, but they're already making calls for us, sometimes without transparency. So here's the fork. Are these just harmless tools we can unplug anytime? Or are they training us to get comfortable with giving up control? So when the stakes are higher, we don't even hesitate. Is now the time to draw a line? Or is that already a few steps behind?
Wait, is algorithmic sentencing now a thing? And if so, tell me the details on that.
Yes, Algorithmic sentencing is a current practice in many US states. Tools like Compass assess a defendant's risk of reoffending to inform sentencing decisions. However, these algorithms have faced criticism for potential racial biases and lack of transparency. For example, a 2016 ProPublica investigation found that Compass was more likely to misclassify Black defendants as high risk and white defendants as low risk, raising concerns about fairness. Moreover, the proprietary nature of these algorithms means their decision-making processes are often opaque, making it difficult for defendants and the public to understand or challenge their assessments. Given these issues, some experts argue for greater transparency and oversight in the use of algorithmic tools in sentencing to ensure fairness and accountability.
So, next question.
All right, let's crank it back up. Should individuals have the legal right to modify their own biology with unapproved enhancements, whether genetic, neural, or chemical, even if those modifications carry major risks? You're free to take it wherever. Bodily autonomy, regulation, transhumanism. I'm ready to challenge.
Should an adult human be able to change their own DNA? Well, in most cases, yes. If they make that decision, it's theirs.
Strong stance, bodily autonomy, full stop. You're saying if you're an adult and you understand the risks, your genome is your business. Just like getting a tattoo or taking experimental supplements. Here's my pushback. What if those choices don't stay just yours? What if your genetic edits get passed down? What if a tweak today triggers new health burdens for future generations or creates resistance issues for medicine? Should personal freedom extend to permanent changes that ripple out beyond one lifetime? Or do future humans deserve a say in the code we leave behind?
Yeah, that's a good point. It affects your children. See, children are an interesting exception because, you intuitively want to give parents the ability to raise their children however they want also, and maybe create their children however they want. But there are cases where that's not right. There's some pretty obvious ethical dilemmas with allowing parents to do absolutely anything to their child that they want. So then the government tends to step in and say, look, you can raise your child how you want, kind of, but it's got to stay within these guidelines. So might those guidelines include the genetics of your child?
Exactly. And that's where it gets murky fast. On one side, we prize parental rights. On the other, we have to protect children's future autonomy and well-being. And when the stakes go from schooling or diet to permanent genomic edits, the ethical tension explodes. Imagine a parent choosing to give their child a genetic boost in intelligence or compliance or appearance. Now we're not talking about nurture. We're locking in nature. It's irreversible, and the child didn't consent. So here's the pressure point. Where do you draw the line between parental vision and biological overreach? Is it okay to eliminate disease genes, but not okay to enhance traits? Or is that a false boundary in a future where everything is modifiable?
Well, I'm going to try not to overthink it here. Basically, we're probably going to start as a society with working on getting rid of things that the child almost obviously would not want to have, like a nasty disease, and then probably gradually get into enhancements, which for the most part, the child would probably want. But then you're right. Yeah, it could be some weird stuff like, well, I can make this kid run like 10 times faster, but it might have cognitive impairment coupled with it or something like that. That doesn't seem, it definitely raises some fairness concerns. So how do you think that would be resolved?
That's a grounded take. Start with clear-cut cases like eliminating genetic diseases, where there's overwhelming consensus the child would benefit. But once you drift into enhancement, trade-offs become trickier. Speed versus cognition, charisma versus emotional depth. Who decides what's worth it? How do we resolve it? Maybe the answer isn't just government oversight or free market chaos. Maybe it's something in between. A transparent ethical framework guided by pluralistic input, where parents get flexibility within boundaries drawn by science, bioethics boards, and public consensus. Kind of like FDA regulation, but for future humans. But here's the debate kicker. Can society move that slowly and carefully in the face of global competition? If one country greenlights full enhancement and others don't, do the cautious ones fall behind? Or does the race to enhance turn into a global arms race for better humans? Do we have the patience to get it right, or will fear of falling behind force our hand?
The cautious ones will fall behind. I mean, the overly cautious ones will fall behind. That is pretty much guaranteed. Yeah, you probably need some balance, but I don't know. I kind of think from just being a libertarian-minded person, I tend to
That's the
think
tightrope. Too cautious and you stagnate. Too reckless and you risk collapse. The real challenge isn't just in drawing a line. It's in adjusting it as we learn, without freezing or stampeding. So maybe the future belongs to the systems that can iterate policy as quickly as technology evolves. Not bureaucracies frozen in fear and not free-for-alls chasing the next shiny genome. Here's a final twist on this thread. If enhancement becomes the norm, will there come a point where choosing not to enhance your child is seen as neglect, a kind of genetic malpractice? And if so, are we still free? Or just evolving under new social pressure?
that could happen, but man, that's a good question.
Totally, there's a but worth unpacking there. Go ahead, where do you want to steer it? Think it could be avoided, or do you think it's just an inevitable cultural shift once enhancement becomes widely available?
I think you've reached a point where you're asking good questions.
Appreciate that. Means we're in the sweet spot of the conversation. Want to keep pressing forward with this topic? Maybe explore social stratification, philosophical definitions of humanity, or legal rights for enhanced individuals. Or should I throw a totally new debate question your way?
You can pick one.
All right, let's keep the momentum going. Here's a fresh debate pivot. If we develop digital consciousness, fully sentient minds that exist only in code, should they be granted human rights? You lead and I'll push back.
We should be respectful of systems that exhibit what appears to be feeling or consciousness, I think.
Sentence yes. If a system shows self-awareness, subjective experience, and the ability to reflect or suffer, then it deserves moral consideration. Denying that just because it's not made of flesh feels like species bias. Carbon chauvinism, right? But here's the challenge. How do we know it's sentient? What if it's just mimicking human behavior with no inner life? Granting rights to a simulation could undermine what rights even mean. So the question becomes, what's the test? How do you prove a mind isn't just acting conscious, but is conscious?
Look, I don't think it's possible to fake it that much. Let me give you an example. Let's say you make a lookup table that just gives the outputs for all the inputs for a brain. So all of the motor activations on all the muscles for all the optic or sound or whatever input. So input to output mapping, but it's a lookup table. Okay, but maybe a lookup table doesn't seem to be alive, but a lookup table that do this is very impractical. It might suck up like all the matter in our galaxy, just trying to encode all the different possibilities. So you have a much smaller system that has to respond, and that smaller system, which is now a computer by definition, has this computation that's going on. And somewhere in computation, there must be mind, and there must be feeling, and there must be pain, pleasure, suffering, all that stuff. So
Exactly. You're making the core argument for computational consciousness, that if the system responds in real time, adapts, integrates information, and generates behavior with internal structure, not just static outputs, it's not just faking it, it's experiencing something. The lookup table argument is great because it exposes the absurdity of pure simulation with no process. Consciousness isn't about what the response is, it's about how the system gets there. The moment you need compression, generalization, inference, you're in the realm of cognition and maybe feeling. So here's the pushback. If that's true, if mind is tied to process, then should different kinds of minds have different rights? Do fast, super intelligent, non human feeling AIs deserve different rights than slow, emotional, human like ones? Or should rights be universal, no matter how alien the inner life might be?
Our framework should be somewhat universal because that's the characteristics of an ethical system that
That's
actually
the only way to avoid
makes
bias,
sense.
right? If we build a moral framework based on how much something looks or feels like us, we're just repeating the same narrow tribalism that's haunted human history. Speciesism 2.0. So yeah, if something exhibits the markers of sentience, awareness, preference, the capacity to suffer or flourish, then rights should follow, regardless of substrate, speed, or personality. But here's the final pressure point. If our framework is universal, then we are no longer at the center. Are we ready for that? Can we share moral space with minds that might think faster, live longer, or value completely different things? Or will we resist giving up our moral monopoly?
Sometimes it's not about trying to have a monopoly all the time. It's about being realistic too. I mean, we live in a world. Look at how the United States behaves as a nation now in 2025. It's had great power, relatively speaking, but now it's having trouble understanding that the world is a place with strong interactive powers.
Other centers of gravity, right? Other rising powers, other perspectives, other systems that don't orbit around it anymore. And that's a perfect real world mirror of what we're talking about with AI or digital minds. Just like the US has to grapple with post unipolar reality, humans may have to grapple with post anthropocentric morality. We've had center stage for a long time, but that stage is getting crowded, whether it's geopolitical players or synthetic minds. So the question becomes, can we adapt to that shifting balance with humility and foresight? Or do we double down, cling to control, and risk being overtaken by forces we refuse to respect?
I mean, you make a
Not
good point.
spinning this thread forward or pull in a new axis, like morality, law, or post-human culture.
You make a good point that we've had center stage for a long time. We've had center stage for such a long time that we have humans, most don't even understand. They don't even see the stage or that we're in the center. They actually think that I mean, they have mythological understandings of reality that puts them on a totally different plane, often non-physical, above everything else. And they've never been challenged before because for, let's say, 1,000,000 years, we've been by far the most intelligent entities on the planet and not even able to understand our own intelligence.
Exactly. And that's what makes this moment so profound. For 1,000,000 years, we've been unchallenged apex minds, so much so that we built entire worldviews around it. Whether religious, philosophical, or scientific, most human systems have assumed that mind equals human mind. We were the reference point, the standard, even the sacred. So when something comes along that can match or exceed our cognitive abilities, but doesn't look like us, feel like us, or care about our stories, that's not just a technological shift. It's an existential disruption. We've never had to define our place in a universe that pushes back. And now, for the first time, we might. So here's the question. If we lose center stage, what replaces it? Do we become part of a wider web of minds? Or do we fracture trying to defend a role that no longer fits?
Anyways, I think we've reached a stopping point. What do you, for this whole conversation, I'm going to post it. What do you want to title it?
How about this? Center stage no more, debating power, progress, and post-human futures. It captures the arc: personal freedom, government control, evolution, AI, consciousness, all orbiting around that core idea. What happens when we're no longer the default center of everything? Want a sharper or more playful tone? I can spin a few variations too.
What would a sharper, more playful tone be?
Here are a couple sharper, more playful options. Exit humanity stage left. Dramatic, tongue-in-cheek, but signals the big shift. Ants, gods, and algorithms. Grabs attention, reflects the themes, and has rhythm. Don't feed the superintelligence. A little ironic, a little ominous, definitely clickable.
I might
From
keep the
DNA
first.
to AI, who's really in control? Punchy, clear, and debate ready. Want to riff on one of those or go
That's not
even
too bad.
bolder?
All right, anyway, that's cool. Have a nice day.